Hey, welcome back. Today we're actually making a video on the Kavat buffs. I know it's been requested by a lot of players that don't quite understand how to actually tell if you have a double buff or a triple buff or a single buff. You can see it on the top right side, but when it gets to the double and the triple, it becomes a little bit tricky. So let's jump right into it. This is what we have in here. This is the Kavat, and this is the mod that causes all the buffs to happen. It has to be a Smeeta Kavat. Now, it says Smeeta Kavat has 28% chance every 27 seconds to bestow its owner with good fortune, which basically tells you that there is a 28% chance every 27 seconds for something to happen. There is 5 different buffs. You have the reload buff, which we don't have to worry about because we only equip bows, or we don't equip any primary or secondary, which gets rid of that completely. And we have the shield buff, which gives a shield, and we have the energy buff, which gives you energy, which means you can cast abilities and spells and you don't lose energy. Then we have the rare resource buff, which gives you a rare resource based on wherever you are. If you are in the void, for instance, it will give you Argon Crystal. If you are in Jupiter, it will give you neural sensors. Basically, that's how it goes. Then we have the buff that we need, which is the affinity buff. Affinity buff gives you more affinity, doubles the affinity, and doubles the resources. So if you're doing Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, for instance, you're gonna level up way faster from that buff. Now, what the affinity buff does is it gives you double. Now we always have right here, as you can see, resource booster. This resource booster, instead of Acolyte dropping like usual two steel essence, he's gonna drop with this resource booster 4. So if you get an affinity buff, one affinity buff, it's gonna make those 4. It will double it and it will make it 8. Now if you get a double buff, it will make those 8 into 16. If you get a triple buff, which you guys will see in the video, I got 32 from 1 steel essence. If you get a quadruple buff, you're actually gonna get 64. I had one of the people in here. I've had a quadruple buff before, but I was too naive. I remember picking up stuff and I seen 64. It never made sense to me back then when we used to do Odin and Ophelia. One of the guys in the comment section actually said he got a quadruple buff in the first 4 minutes and he never even got a chance to pick up the steel essence. So it does happen. It does happen. Yeah, you might say it's 28% chance and you have to divide that by 4 chances, and what are the odds? It does happen. So if you do this long enough, eventually you're gonna get a double and a triple buff. This is just how it is. You're spending an hour, and I would suggest, my personal opinion is, if you go into a mission, go in and believing that you're gonna get a double buff. Don't go in there with that negative attitude like, oh man, I'm not getting nothing, I'm just gonna test it out. I would suggest going in there with a positive attitude. At least you might manifest it. If you don't manifest it, at least you're not gonna feel as fucked up about not receiving a double buff. So let's jump into it and actually show you exactly footage that I had in gameplay where I got yesterday a double buff and a triple buff. Okay, so we're gonna have a clip actually taking a look at when I get a buff. See, I got a buff. It's 2 minutes 35 seconds, which is 155 seconds of an affinity buff. Now the next possible procs will happen at the 127 second, 101 seconds, 74 seconds, 47, and 14. There might be a possibility that I might get a double buff or a shield or something, or even nothing, because as I explained to you guys, it's 28% chance for something to happen. So I look at the top right side, it's about to be 127, and boom, I get another buff. That technically leaves me with 2 buffs. So the first buff came and the second buff came at the 127 seconds. It leaves me with 127 seconds. If you think about it in terms of seconds, you might get confused, so think about it in terms of rotations. I got one at the 127, that means I have another one at the 101, 74, 47, and 13. I have 4 more chances. So the next possible chance should happen at the 127. Is it gonna happen? There we go. And that's a triple buff. That's what a triple buff is. Now keep in mind, sometimes the buff actually can come at the 5th rotation or at the 4th rotation, and when that happens, you'll have to if it comes at the 4th rotation, you have 1 more possible chance. Yes, it will go back to 155, but once it reaches the 127, you know that's a rotation. So it's always just go based on rotations. It's easier to count. Look, I had 127 in the top right side, nothing happened, so I didn't get anything. The 3rd chance, there was nothing. So I know I have about 70 seconds left, technically. That's why I always say, hey, I'll push it for another buff, and I'll push it for 2 more buffs, because I just go based off rotation. I know I missed the 74-second chance, and when it reaches the 101, it will be technically the 47 chance, and I'll wait and I will look. Is it gonna pop? It gave me energy. So the 4th chance gave me energy instead of a buff. I already have a triple buff, I still have about 38 seconds, as you can see right there, 35, 36 seconds of a triple buff. And I have one more chance at the 14 seconds. And when you look up top, it says 84, 83. The next possible chance is at the 74 seconds. That's the rotation. Look at them based on rotations. Is anything going to happen at the 74 seconds? Nothing. I look, nothing. I'm like, okay, perfect. Collect. Now you have 16 or 14 seconds for a triple buff, but you're not getting no more steel essence out of this. And that's exactly how to keep track of the steel essence. Basically, you treat them based on rotations, not based on seconds. As soon as you get the first affinity buff, automatically in the top of your head, I should be possibly getting something at the 127, possibly getting something at the 101, possibly getting something at the 74, possibly getting something at the 47, or getting something at the 13 or 14 second mark. If you don't get anything during that time, then that means you have just a single buff. So paying attention to the actual buff from the beginning and treating it based off rotations will make it a lot easier on you if you're trying to get a triple buff. But if you're trying to get a double buff, it's easy, because as soon as you see the buff itself right there and another one comes on top of it, and technically you just have a double buff. But if you want to push it for a triple buff, you have to treat it based on rotations. Hopefully that explained. I know it's that my explanation is a little bit hazy, but if you guys have any more questions for me to further clarify this, I have no problem maybe speaking to you guys directly, because I think this sums it up generally what a double buff and what a triple buff looks like. You might have a quadruple buff. The thing that was interesting about this one is each and every single buff, other than the first one, came at the 127 second mark. So I got a buff, and the next one was actually a buff, and the next one was actually a buff. I usually get a double buff at the 13 second mark, 47, 74, but this time it happened back to back, which gave me so many chances to actually go back, not go back, but gave me so many chances to push for a quadruple buff. And that's how it is. Hopefully that explains it to some of the new players. And if you guys have any more questions, feel free to leave a comment in the comment section down, and we'll see you guys on the next video. Take care.